My name is Tessa, and I'm a 32-year-old web designer. I've been on my own since losing my parents at a young age, and I've grown accustomed to living alone. I never planned on getting into a serious relationship. My goal was to live life on my terms, enjoying every moment. I bought a small apartment a few years back. It's not much, but it's mine, and I love it. After work, I usually spend my evenings scrolling through social media. One ordinary Tuesday evening, as I was mindlessly flipping through my feeds, a notification popped up. A handsome guy had sent me a message. I didn't think much of it at first. I get random messages now and then. But something about this one felt different. His name was Jake. "Hey there, Tessa. I couldn't help but notice your profile. You've got a great eye for design. I run an auto repair shop, and I've been thinking about updating our website." I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't often that I mixed business with pleasure, but something about Jake's message intrigued me. I decided to reply. "Hi Jake, thanks for reaching out. I'm always interested in new projects." And just like that, our correspondence began. His messages were always thoughtful, never pushy. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to our dreams for the future. Jake was funny, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of daily chats, Jake finally asked me out on a proper date. "Tessa, I've really enjoyed talking with you this past week. Would you like to grab dinner with me this Friday? I know a great Italian place downtown." I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. Jake was waiting for me outside the restaurant. He was even more handsome in person, tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He greeted me with a warm smile and a gentle hug. As we sat down at our table, I couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. Jake was confident and charming, making me feel at ease right away. We talked and laughed for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as it had in our messages. "So, tell me more about your auto repair shop," I said, genuinely curious about his work. Jake's eyes lit up. "It's been my dream since I was a kid. I love cars, and I love helping people. The shop lets me do both. I've got a great team of mechanics working for me now, which gives me more time to focus on growing the business." As the night went on, I found myself more and more drawn to Jake. He was smart, ambitious, and incredibly easy to talk to. By the time we said goodnight, I knew this wouldn't be our last date. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I saw each other more and more. He took me to art galleries, knowing I'd appreciate the designs. I helped him brainstorm ideas for his shop's new website. It felt natural, easy, like we'd known each other for years. One night, as we were walking hand in hand through the park, Jake turned to me. "Tessa, I need to tell you something. I want you to meet my mom." The day I met Jake's mother, Sarah, was a turning point in our relationship. Jake had told me she was ill after a stroke, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of her condition. We arrived at a modest suburban home, and Jake helped his mother to the door. Sarah's movements were slow and labored, her speech slurred. But her eyes were sharp and kind as they met mine. "Mom, this is Tessa," Jake said, his voice full of warmth. "Tessa, meet my mom, Sarah." Sarah's face lit up with a smile. "Welcome, Tessa," she managed, her words coming out with effort. I felt an immediate rush of empathy for this woman. "It's wonderful to meet you, Sarah," I said, taking her hand gently. Over cups of tea, we chatted. Sarah's speech was halting, but her mind was clearly active. She asked about my work, my family, my aspirations. I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't done with anyone in a long time. "You're good for my Jake," Sarah said at one point, her eyes twinkling. From that day on, our relationship deepened. Jake and I spent more time together, and I found myself falling for him harder than I ever thought possible. He was everything I'd never known I wanted: kind, funny, ambitious, and deeply caring. A year flew by in a whirlwind of dates, laughter, and shared moments. We had our disagreements, of course, but we always worked through them. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, Jake proposed to me. Yes, I breathed, tears of joy streaming down my face. Yes, I'll marry you, Jake. We celebrated with Sarah that night, her joy evident. As I hugged her, she whispered in my ear, "Welcome to the family, dear." The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding planning and big decisions. Jake and I agreed that after the wedding, we'd move into Sarah's house. It was bigger than my apartment, and it made sense to be there to help care for her. I put my apartment up for rent, feeling a mix of excitement and nostalgia as I packed up my single life. Change had never been easy for me, but with Jake by my side, I felt ready for anything. Our wedding day was perfect, simple and intimate, just like we wanted. As we exchanged vows, I looked into Jake's eyes and saw my future. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who didn't want any attachments. The first few months of married life were a whirlwind of joy and adjustment. But Sarah's condition weighed heavily on my mind. Seeing her struggle with daily tasks broke my heart, and I was determined to help improve her quality of life. I set about hiring professionals to help with her rehabilitation. Weeks turned into months, and we began to see remarkable improvements in Sarah's condition. She started walking more steadily, her speech became clearer, and her overall mood lifted. One day, I came home to find her puttering around in the garden, something she hadn't been able to do in years. "Tessa," she called out, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Look at these tomatoes. They're coming in beautifully." Tears sprang to my eyes as I hugged her. "They're perfect, Sarah. Just like you." As Sarah's health improved, she insisted on taking over more household tasks. Soon, she was cooking meals and tidying up, humming to herself as she worked. It was a joy to see her regain her independence. However, as Sarah blossomed, I began to notice subtle changes in Jake. He started staying late at work more often, citing increased business at the auto shop. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, a successful business meant security for our future. But then the weekend trips started. "Just checking on a supplier," he'd say, or meeting a potential investor. I tried to be understanding, but a nagging feeling of unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. One Saturday afternoon, as I was curled up with a book, Sarah approached me, her face etched with concern. "Tessa, dear," she said, sitting beside me. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but don't you think Jake is away too often?" I felt a lump form in my throat. So, I wasn't the only one who had noticed. "I've been wondering about that too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah patted my hand. "You need to keep an eye on him, Tessa. Don't allow him too many liberties." Her words startled me. It seemed odd that she would advise me to be suspicious of her own son. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw genuine concern there. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "He's probably just busy with work." Sarah shook her head slowly. "Just be careful, dear. Men can be unpredictable." Her words haunted me over the next few weeks. One night, as Jake kissed me goodbye before another late meeting, I made a decision. The next day, I contacted a private detective agency. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But as I sat across from the detective, explaining my suspicions, I knew it was the right thing to do. 3 weeks passed, each day a torment of doubt and anxiety. Finally, the detective called and scheduled an appointment. With a heavy heart, I went to his office, dreading what I might learn. The detective's words hit me like a physical blow. "Mrs. Collins, I'm sorry to report that your husband has been unfaithful. Not just with one woman, but several." He handed me a file, and as I flipped through it, my world shattered. Photos, text messages, hotel receipts, all damning evidence of Jake's infidelity. But what shocked me most was the meticulous organization of it all. "He's created a schedule," the detective explained, his voice uncomfortable. "Each woman has her designated day or time slot. It seems he's arranged it for his convenience." I left the office in a daze, clutching the file to my chest. When I arrived home, Jake wasn't there, probably with one of his mistresses, I thought bitterly. I collapsed on the sofa, overwhelmed by the weight of what I'd learned. Sarah found me there, tears streaming down my face. "Tessa, dear? What's wrong?" I couldn't hold it in. Through sobs, I showed her the detective's report, revealing the extent of Jake's betrayal. Sarah listened in silence, her face a mask of calm as she looked at the evidence of her son's numerous infidelities. When I finished, Sarah squeezed my hand gently. "You need to rest now, Tessa," she said, her voice steady. "You need a clear mind to make decisions. Go to bed, dear." Exhausted and emotionally drained, I nodded and headed to the guest room. I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping in the bed I shared with Jake. The next morning, I went to work, leaving Jake still asleep after his supposed night shift. I couldn't face him, couldn't trust myself to look at him without falling apart or lashing out. At work, I struggled to focus. My colleagues noticed my distraction, but I brushed off their concerns. I stayed late, buried in projects, anything to avoid going home. It was nearly midnight when I finally left the office. As I approached our house, a strange sight greeted me. The garage door was open, and I could hear an engine running. To my shock, I saw Sarah behind the wheel of Jake's pickup truck. She abruptly drove forward, bursting out of the garage. As she neared me, she slowed down. "Get in," she commanded, her voice sharp and urgent. Confused and alarmed, I obeyed without thinking. As soon as I closed the door, Sarah accelerated. In the rearview mirror, I saw Jake running after us, shouting and cursing. His face was contorted with rage, a side of him I'd never seen before. "Sarah, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. But she kept her eyes on the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. For about 30 minutes, we drove in tense silence. I was too afraid to speak, worried that I might distract Sarah from the road. Finally, Sarah began to slow down. She carefully checked our surroundings, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror repeatedly. Satisfied that we weren't being followed, she pulled into a small, dimly lit roadside cafe. "Come on," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." Inside the cafe, we ordered coffee. Once we were seated in a corner booth, Sarah leaned in close. "Tessa," she began, her voice a loud whisper. "An hour ago, I overheard Jake on the phone. He said he wanted to get rid of us. Both of us." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? No, that can't be right. Jake wouldn't." Sarah's face fell as she saw my disbelief. Without a word, she reached into her purse and pulled out Jake's phone. "I found this in his car when I was leaving," she explained. "Look for yourself." With shaking hands, I took the phone. I knew Jake's passwords, we had always been open with each other. Or so I thought. I unlocked the phone and, following Sarah's guidance, opened his messaging apps. What I found made my blood run cold. There were messages to someone labeled nursing home director. As I read through the conversation, my horror grew. Jake was indeed planning to get rid of Sarah, not by killing her as she had feared, but by having her declared incapacitated and placed in a state nursing home. I quickly looked up reviews for the facility and felt sick to my stomach. "Sarah," I said, my voice breaking, "you're right. Jake was planning something terrible. He wants to put you in this nursing home, but the reviews are awful. The way they treat the elderly there." Sarah let out a long breath, a mix of relief and anger crossing her face. "At least he wasn't planning to kill me," she said, her voice bitter. "But Tessa, living in a place like that, it might as well be murder." With trembling hands, we continued our exploration of Jake's phone. The sheer volume of conversations with different women was overwhelming. These weren't just fleeting flirtations, they were full-blown affairs. My eyes caught on a particular exchange that made my blood run cold. "I can't wait to be rid of them both," Jake had written to one of his mistresses. "Once Mom's out of the picture, I'll leave Tessa. I'm tired of playing the devoted husband and son. I need my freedom." I read the words aloud to Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. The cafe around us seemed to fade away as the weight of Jake's betrayal settled over us like a heavy blanket. We continued reading, both of us growing more disgusted with each message. The intimate details Jake shared with these women made me feel violated and humiliated. He described our private moments, complained about my habits, and praised these other women in ways he had never praised me. Despite my revulsion, a small part of my brain reminded me that I needed evidence. With shaking hands, I began forwarding all the incriminating messages to my email. It felt wrong, like I was violating Jake's privacy, but I pushed the thought aside. After what felt like hours of reading, we couldn't bear to look at any more messages. I put the phone down, feeling dirty and exhausted. We ordered fresh coffee, both of us needing something to do, something normal to cling to in the midst of this nightmare. As we sat there, both trying to process what we'd learned, I noticed Sarah's face take on a faraway look. She stared into her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim absently. "Tessa," she began, her voice heavy with old pain. "There's something I need to tell you about Jake's father, my husband." I leaned in, sensing that whatever Sarah was about to share was important. Her words hit me like a physical blow. "Jake's father, he was unfaithful too," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't just have affairs. He had a whole other family. 2 children and everything." I gasped, unable to hide my shock. Sarah nodded sadly, confirming the unbelievable truth. "I knew about it," Sarah admitted, her eyes downcast. "I found out years ago, but I loved him so much, Tessa. And I was terrified he'd leave us if I confronted him. So I turned a blind eye. I convinced myself that as long as he came home to us, it was enough." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. I prayed that Jake would be different. I thought seeing his father's bad example would make him loyal and devoted. I thought he'd want to be a better man than his father." Sarah's eyes met mine, filled with regret and sorrow. "But from a young age, Jake was just like him. He went through girls like they were disposable, often dating several at once. There were so many, I couldn't even remember their faces or names. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always brushed me off, said he was just having fun." I sat there, stunned by this revelation. The Jake I knew, or thought I knew, seemed so far removed from this callous young man Sarah was describing. "When he married you, Tessa," Sarah continued, reaching out to grasp my hand, "I thought he'd finally changed. I liked you so much from the moment I met you. You were kind, intelligent, and you genuinely cared for Jake. I desperately wanted him to be happy with you. I thought maybe you were the one who could make him settle down, be faithful. But now," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Now he's gone back to his old ways," I finished for her, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded sadly. "And it's worse than before. He's not just cheating, he wants to get rid of both of us. Also, he can bring his mistresses into our home without interference. He's become even worse than his father. I'm going to divorce him," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "There's no coming back from this." Sarah nodded, understanding etched across her face. But then, to my surprise, she began to cry quietly. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please don't leave me too." My heart ached at her vulnerability. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. "Sarah, I would never leave you. You're family to me, more than Jake ever was." She smiled through her tears, squeezing my hands gratefully. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the enormity of the situation. Then, almost without realizing it, I found myself speaking again. "There's something else," I said softly. "I'm pregnant. I just found out this morning at work." Sarah's eyes widened, a mix of emotions playing across her face. Then, to my surprise, a fierce determination settled in her eyes. "Then it's time we fought back," she said, her voice strong. "For you, and for that baby." With renewed purpose, we got back into the pickup truck and headed home. When we arrived, Jake was waiting for us. His face was contorted with fury as he started yelling at Sarah. "How dare you run off with my car and my phone? What the hell were you thinking?" Before he could continue his tirade, I stepped forward, the detective's report clutched in my hand. "Jake," I interrupted, my voice cold, "I know all about your mistresses, and I want a divorce." The change in Jake was instantaneous. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a cool indifference that chilled me to the bone. He didn't even try to deny anything. "Fine," he said, shrugging. "You were never enough for me anyway. But hey, if you want to stick around and put up with my extracurricular activities, I wouldn't mind." I couldn't help it, I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "I don't think so, Jake. I don't need a man like you in my life." His face darkened. "Get out," he spat, pointing at the door. "This is my house. Get out now." Before I could respond, Sarah stepped forward. "Actually," she said, her voice steely, "this is my house. And I'll decide who stays and who goes." She turned to Jake, her eyes hard. "You need to leave, son." Jake looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Mom," he spluttered, "I'm your son. She's nothing to you, just some woman I married. You can't choose her over me." Sarah reached out and took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Tessa is like a daughter to me," she said. "And she's carrying my grandchild." Jake's eyes widened at this news. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I thought I had married. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice softer. Then I have to stay. The baby needs a father." I shook my head, feeling a surge of strength. "No, Jake. This child doesn't need a father like you. Someone who lies, cheats, and tries to abandon his own mother." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Tessa and the baby will stay here with me," she said firmly. "You need to leave, Jake. Now." Without another word, Jake turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. In 6 months I sat in the courtroom, my hand resting protectively over my growing belly, as the judge delivered her verdict. Jake's numerous affairs, coupled with his attempts to manipulate both Sarah and me, weighed heavily in my favor. The judge's voice echoed through the room as she awarded me substantial compensation for Jake's infidelities. Sarah had made her own decisions in the wake of Jake's betrayal. She met with her lawyer and made changes to her will, officially disinheriting Jake. Instead, she bequeathed her house and all her savings to me and my unborn child. Months passed, and as my due date approached, Sarah and I settled into a comfortable routine. We transformed Jake's old room into a nursery, filling it with soft colors and hopeful dreams for the future. On a warm summer morning, my son came into the world. As I held him in my arms for the first time, Sarah by my side, I felt a profound sense of peace. Looking down at his tiny face, I saw endless possibilities, untainted by the shadows of the past. "Welcome to the world, little one," I whispered, feeling Sarah's comforting hand on my shoulder. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, our little family unit grew stronger. Sarah doted on her grandson, her face lighting up every time he smiled or laughed. For my part, I found strength I never knew I had, juggling motherhood with my web design work, which I now did from home. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, my son sleeping peacefully in my arms, Sarah turned to me with a smile. "You know," she said, "I used to worry about the kind of example Jake would set for his children. But now, looking at you and this little one, I'm filled with hope." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "He'll grow up surrounded by love and integrity," I said, looking down at my sleeping son. "He'll never see the negative example of a father who only thinks about himself, his entertainment, and his mistresses." Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "We've been through so much, Tessa. But look at us now. We're stronger for it." As night fell and we headed inside, I realized that sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. And in that choice, in that love, we had found our happy ending,